So, Trevor Trowbridge, my man, part two of today's show, we are going to talk some quarterback at Notre Dame. And the premise of today's show, we're going to talk, first of all, we're going to begin by talking about some of the comments that Marcus Freeman made yesterday about the quarterback position and the timeline and then his answer to what I said. I want to continue, kind of not parsing what he said, but just reacting to what he said. And then the second part will be getting into sort of our thoughts on the position. And as we said earlier, does it really matter who starts? Why not? And have some fun with that. So the first thing, Trev, is we're going to talk about the timeline that aspect of it, and so and sort of the structure of it. So this is a comment that Marcus Freeman was asked early in yesterday's press conference, and he said, "I don't know if there's a perfect science that I'm going to be able to tell you right now that exactly what we're going to do, but the general theme of it is that they're all going to get reps with the ones. They're all going to get reps that we split. I'm talking Kenny, Steve, and CJ. They're going to split reps, and each day could be different. But it's important for us to communicate with them beforehand, and no matter if they like what group they're going with or not, which it shouldn't matter, that we're upfront and honest with them, and then we give them feedback after each practice, and we'll name a starter when a starter clearly shows that he's the best quarterback. I don't want to put it. This is the timeline part. I don't want to put a timetable on, and I refuse to do that. To me, if you don't have a decision made by then, it's going to frustrate you, and there's no need to put a timetable on it. You let those guys compete, and when a starter is determined, we're going to announce it. But again, I'm excited. I truly love competition. I think it's going to make all the three of those guys better. If it is the first true competition with three guys that I've been a part of, some we've talked about, but I think it's going to be a fair competition. I know it's going to be a fair competition. I'm really excited for it and looking forward to seeing how everyone in that room enhances. But also at some point, somebody's going to be named a starter. So first takeaway from that, Trev, obviously Marcus Freeman confirms it's going to be a little bit different than last year where it was kind of the hierarchy was already established. It was Steve, CJ, or Steve, Kenny. I'll eventually get it right. Steve, Kenny, CJ. We didn't see CJ get a whole lot of chances with the twos or the ones. We didn't see Kenny get a whole lot of chances with the ones. This year, as he said, first real three-man competition we've had. I would argue it's the first competition he's had, period. But I think you can make a case that Tyler Buckner did have a chance to beat out Sam Hartman. If he actually outperformed him, he would have started. Or at least outperformed him enough. But the timeline part, Trev, that's the part that I thought was interesting. The timetable. A lot of people want to say by the end of spring, by this date. Marcus Freeman basically said kind of, look, when someone makes it clear to us, I'm the starter, we'll name him the starter. What were your thoughts on his comments on all that, Trev?
Yeah, I mean, initially it kind of confirms a lot of the things that we've talked about so far this offseason is there is no time. We've gotten so many awesome questions and submissions between mailbags and buy-sell holds and super chats about when will Notre Dame name a starting quarterback? And a lot of our resounding answers has been, well, when one deserves to be named. When I mean deserves, I don't mean based on an arbitrary timeline that Gino Guidugli or Mike Denbrock or Marcus Freeman sets for the team. It's just whenever one is ready to be named. And he reassured that, which is, for me, that's very reassuring to hear. The biggest thing that I took away from his comments was the fact that he was very open around, hey, here's our game plan for this. And we are going to communicate what that plan is with the quarterbacks beforehand. I think when you are in a quarterback competition that is this close and amongst three guys, communication is key. And it is very, 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 very important that you explain, hey, here's the decision we're going with and the why behind it. And I really appreciated that because we've seen horror stories before go down in South Bend with quarterback competitions where things weren't communicated properly. Marcus Freeman touched on, hey, you're going to be taking this rep with this group, and here's why. You're going to be taking this rep with this group, and here's why. And then at the end of the day, you're going to sit down and you can think about, all right, here's how we evaluate these guys, grand scheme of everything. And so that was really big for me. But I really appreciated the timetable comment because you can't put a time frame on something that you don't know when you're going to see what you need to see. And I think that's the most important part. So for me, really appreciated everything that he said.
He said, like, look, what if you make a deadline and you're not, and no one's established himself by then? That could be negative or positive. The negative could be, okay, we have decided that we're going to name a starter after the spring game. Okay. The negative is you get to the end of the spring and you're like, dude, none of these guys earned a starting role. Like, none of them stepped up and led, produced. Our offense got our butts kicked by the defense every day. You know, we turned the ball over a ton. None of the guys really stepped up. One guy'd have today CJ had a great day. Next day he threw 8 picks. And that same day, Kenny had a great day. The next day he threw 8 picks. Steve had a great day. Then the next day Steve threw 8 picks. I mean, you're going to arbitrarily name a starter because you've set a timeline or announced a timeline for that. And if you don't announce it then people like in our side of this, people and fans, social media are going to then run with all the reasons why. Some people will think it's a great competition. Some think because they all sucked. Then the flip side of it is you set an arbitrary deadline for it. But what if it's like, dude, all 3 of these kids are playing like they deserve to be starting at Notre Dame right now. And I'm going to set an arbitrary deadline when nobody has truly risen above. They're all playing their butts off. They've all earned the right to go in late July, early August, whenever camp starts, with an opportunity to keep competing. Now, that's when you start to say, guys, we can't set an arbitrary deadline, but we got to start making some decisions on certain things. So maybe one guy hasn't separated, but if 2 of them have kind of emerged over a third, you got to start working more with that 1 and that 2 to let them more battle now that the third guy's kind of fallen behind. So I think all those things factor into, you've got to, just because you haven't made a decision on a starter doesn't mean you haven't narrowed it down to, we're down to 2. You don't need to announce that, but that's when you got, at some point in time though, you do have to say, I think the one thing I would say that the staff has to set a deadline for is by this certain time, by the end of the first week of camp, we have to at least be down to 2 and start ramping up the reps for those 2. It's going to be really hard to get ready to play at Miami if the first 4 weeks of fall camp, you're splitting reps equally between 3 guys. And that's really what I think you're seeing a battle for this spring will be who kind of goes into the final round. And, like Sean's daughter's in The Voice, right? Like some people, they move on to the next round to compete. Some people don't. You did okay. You did a good job, but you weren't quite as good as this person over here. And that's what I think the spring is more about. Maybe someone steps up and it's like, dude, it was so clear that was a guy. But based on what we saw yesterday, I don't know if anyone's going to be able to just be that much better than everybody else. I think that's what the true competition is this spring, Trevor, is what's the pecking order going into fall camp? We know what it is coming into the spring. It's what it should be. It's a seniority thing, essentially. It's Steve was the backup last year. Kenny's older than CJ, and then CJ's older than Blake Hebert. That's the order. Day 1, what's it going to be like on day 15? That's going to be interesting because that's going to tell us a lot about who has the best shot to win it once we get to fall camp.
Yeah, I agree with you. If there's going to be a timeline on something, it has to be, because the goal is to still whittle out who's going to be the starting quarterback come August 31st. And even though all of these guys are flashy and each one of them has tools and a skill set that can deem them and make them the starter at Notre Dame, at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is still finding somebody who's going to be commanding and leading your offense going down into Miami. And you need to make sure that that person has ample time to make sure that they get prepared and they get ready. I'm with you. I think the spring is going to be whittling out. You don't want to be in a scenario where you have 3 guys going into fall camp where it's like, yeah, it could be any one of them at this point. And then what? Then you start to have an expedited process of like, all right, well, we got to go from 3 to 1 in less than a month. Yeah, so I'm with you. I'm with you on that, because at some point you are going to have to make that decision.
And I don't think playing 2 is an option, because and this will lead us into the second part of the conversation. The Marcus Freeman responded to a question that I asked, and the question was, he's always talked about, hey, we're going to have to fit what we do schematically around the talent we have. And I think for the most part, Notre Dame's done a pretty good job of that. Al Golden didn't always do a great job of that in 2022, but I think a big part of that was they didn't really know what they had because there was some new guys and he was new there. And that was kind of part of the issue, I think, early last year with the Notre Dame offense is like, yeah, I know what guys can do in practice, but I don't know what they can do in games necessarily. But then as Mike Denbrock learned more about his team, they started playing a lot better. As Al Golden started learning more about his team in 2022, they started playing a lot better down the stretch. I mean, they were very good against Syracuse. And I mean, look, the defense isn't the reason that Notre Dame lost to Stanford, although I would argue, you did have a chance in the fourth quarter to make some stops when you had a lead. But again, you held a team to 16 points. You're not the reason that you lost the football game. But they were very good against Clemson. They were very good against BC. And then, of course, you had a bunch of injuries, and that hurt you in the USC game. But they got better. They weren't lights out, but they definitely got better. And then, of course, you come out the next year, and the defense takes a huge jump. So, and a big part of that was he had a better understanding of who J.D. Bertrand was, who Marist was, who these guys were, and he could adjust what he did around his players. And we know that we saw Mike Denbrock do that last year. So the question I asked was essentially, what's the challenge that you have as an offensive staff and as a coaching staff in tailoring your offense to fit your personnel when you don't know who the quarterback is going to be? And here's his answer. And this is why I don't think playing two guys is an option. Like it may be, like I said, I would have been okay in 2023 if they'd have gone into that season. Hey, look, Tyler, don't leave because you're going to play. You're going to play. You're a very different type of quarterback than Sam Hartman. It's not just going to be the runner role that you had as a freshman, but you're going to play because you're a playmaker. We can use you. I don't know if they said that to him. I wish they would have said that to him to try to convince him to stay and not leave. But that in that situation, you could have definitely used two guys. I don't think that you can do that. But and I think that Marcus Freeman's comment here that he said in response to my question speaks to that. I think he speaks to that. He's not responding to whether you can play two. Just so we're clear, but I'm saying his response to my question tells us, Trev, that it does have to be one. It's like, Highlander, right? There can only be one in this particular situation. But this is what he said in response to my question. He goes, I would think they all have similar skill sets, right? Kenny might argue with me that he's as good as a runner as Riley, but I don't know. He would laugh at that point in time. I think they all have similar skill sets with the ability to throw it. The ability, if they need to keep the ball in their hands and extend the play or have an option to run the ball, they can. As we look at it from the big picture, is okay, we knew what Riley's strengths were. We knew what Sam Hartman's strengths were. Now we have an idea of what the collective group in that room, the strengths are. And so how do we tailor what we do offensively to fit the quarterback? And what are we going to ask that guy to do? You've heard me say it many times, great coaches call or ask their players to do what they do well. It is not a play call that you created. It's calling what your guys do well. And that's the objective of the spring, is how can we tailor what we do offensively and call things that we believe our quarterback can perform well. So I thought that was something that was obviously a very good comment, because he said two things. He's like, what you all have to understand about all three of our quarterbacks is all of them can throw it and all of them can use their legs to make plays. And I think now to varying degrees, we may argue that this guy throws it better than the other two. This guy runs better than the other two, but they all are sort of going to run a similar type of offense. Two things about that, Trev. Number one is that's a great benefit to Mike Denbrock, because he can shift the offense the way he wants to shift it, big picture. And then once a starter is established, then you just refine a couple things here and there that quarterback maybe reads a little better. We're going to run smash no matter what, right, as an offensive coordinator. But if this guy starts for me, we may run it more because he reads it and throws it great. This guy, he's okay with it in certain situations, but it's not something we're going to run 5 different variations of smash because he reads it so well. Like that's not changing your offense. That's just we're running this, but we're just going to kind of slowly or like just slightly modify it this way to fit what this guy does well or that guy does well. You don't need to make a wholesale adjustment the way that maybe they had to make going from Sam Hartman to Riley Leonard from a season to a season, or even going from Tyler Buckner to Sam Hartman. So that was number one, Trev. But then the second part of it, it said to me, and this is a takeaway I had later is, but this is why there can only be one. Because I don't think Kenny is such a dynamic runner that if he's not your one, that you just find reasons to get him the ball. Because, and it's not that he can't make plays, but it's like, are you really going to put Kenny Minchey in the game, who's not the starter, to carry the football or run the football when you have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams and Keedron Young and Jabron Payne and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Will Paul? I mean, I could go on. Kenny's not Tyler Buckner. And if you had a quarterback type of guy that was going to do that, I'm putting Tyler Buckner in the game to do that. I also think that that's not Kenny's number one strength. Kenny's number one strength is throwing the football, not running the football. I said it before, he is a drop back passing quarterback who happens to be athletic. So is CJ. And Steve is as well. He's not as athletic as maybe the other two, but go watch the Purdue game if you don't think Steve Angeli can use his legs to make some plays. So I think that there's just not enough of a variation of a skill set, Trevor, to say, hey, we can use 2. Because if you use 2, that tells me that nobody separated and kind of took hold of that position, and that's not a great place to be. Like you want to know when Steve Spurrier's teams kind of started to decline? It's that era where he started using 2 quarterbacks that basically Doug Johnson and Rex Grossman are not different. It was Jesse Palmer and Rex Grossman, right? Wasn't it them? They're not different quarterbacks, Trev. You know what I mean? Like they were guys that were kind of, they had different skill sets, but as far as just how they run an offense, they were pretty much the same guy. And that just wasn't a recipe for success, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you go with 2 guys with all 3 quarterbacks having similar skill sets, it tells me one of 2 things. 1, what you just said. 2, it tells me that this coaching staff didn't want to make a decision. If that makes sense. It's either nobody separated themselves or there was a fear of who might make a decision based on what we decide to go with. And so to feed multiple mouths per se, we're going to go with multiple people. Either one of those is not an ideal situation to be in, especially when you have quarterbacks. Look, I understand why there was multiple quarterbacks played in 2021. Jack Cohn, great from the pocket, great passer, grossly underrated, especially for his time being at Notre Dame. But
playing behind that line?
Yeah, yes. But Tyler Buckner brought in an element that Jack Cohn just couldn't provide. But there's within reason, there's no skill set that Kenny brings to the table that CJ or Steve don't. There's no skill set that CJ brings to the table that Steve or Kenny don't. And the list goes on to varying degrees. Do I think that in a straight line speed contest, do I think that Kenny Minchey is a little bit faster than Steve Angeli? Yeah, I do. But not to the point where it's, well, this is why you have to play both. And not especially not when you have the running back room that you have, to your point that you made earlier. So, yeah, it all just speaks down to whittling it down to one guy. And then, Brian, you played the position. I played the position. It's also about getting in a rhythm. Because even in years where it made sense to play both, like in 21, you could still see that it would affect Jack Cohn from time to time.
At times.
That it was I could get yanked in the middle of a series. I could get yanked in the middle of, a half, and it's that messes with the rhythm to some degree.
But also, Trev, it's not even just about I could get yanked. It's also about you're rolling, and all of a sudden you make the decision to put Tyler in, and now I'm not back on the field for 20 minutes, and we've kind of lost that rhythm. Or I'm not in a good rhythm, And then I don't get that next series to kind of get into a good rhythm. And now I'm not only not in a good rhythm, but now I'm cold because, Tyler put a drive together or made a big play, and then the other team's offense goes on a nice long drive. It could be a momentum killer. And the way that Notre Dame did it, at times it wasn't just like if it was just like for a play or a package, Jack comes off, Tyler runs 2 plays, goes back on. That's a little bit better. But there were times they just put Tyler in and just like, okay, Tyler, just go run the offense. I think that got a little bit challenging. So there has to be a unique scenario, to your point, Trev, where you're going to use 2. I thought Florida did a great. I talked about Florida with Spurrier. When did Florida use 2 quarterbacks and it worked great? 2006, because Chris Leak was the starter, but then they put Tim Tebow in short yardage or goal line and use his big body and his running ability to just score a touchdown. But that wasn't the same as Tebow's going to go in there and run the 3rd series. It was short yardage. Chris runs off. Tim runs on. He gets the first down. CJ goes right, or Chris goes CJ. That's his older brother, CJ Leak. Don't want to bring that up around Notre Dame fans. But Chris Leak goes back on there. I have to tell you that story, Trev. That was a little bit before your time. But Chris goes back in there. Tim goes off. It worked because they had very clearly defined roles and limited roles for Tim Tebow. So I think those things aren't they're just not a group that is compatible to play together. Now, if you do have to play 2 because no one separates, then you do that because no one separated. You don't do that because, boy, they just both played so good. I don't know how that's going to work. That was the mistake of 2016. Just pick a quarterback and go with them. I don't like your decision. I think you're making the wrong decision. But you're hurting your team by pretending that you really think Malik Zaire is in this quarterback competition, when all along you wanted it to be Deshaun's because you set Malik up to fail. Now, I thought Kelly made the wrong decision. I'm not trying to rehash that. My point isn't that Kelly should have started Malik. I've said that a million times. It doesn't matter. It was a decade ago now. The point is, the mistake wasn't just that I think he picked the wrong guy. The bigger mistake is that the way that they did it, it prevented the offense from really having an identity and having the kind of leadership structure you needed to be successful. And then by the time you turn to Deshaun in game 2, your identity as a team had already been established. It wasn't a good one. And so that is like the concern that I have about it taking too long, but also I felt from that comment, Trev, that you won't see 2. But here's why the bigger takeaway from that comment, and that is that comment shows to us that they agree that we are on the same page with the Notre Dame coaching staff, which is you don't have to greatly alter what you're doing actually, I don't think you have to alter at all during the spring of what you like. And if anything, Mike Denbrock can lean even harder into what he likes as a passing coach. These are the concepts I like that I think are going to work best against our 2025 schedule. Because why? Because if I'm leaning into what I like and what fits our pass catchers, but what if that benefits so-and-so more? Exactly. Because if this is what I think is best for the type of receivers I have and the type of what I have on the line and what I have at quarterback, I think we need to be able to get under center and run the ball so we can run more play action pass. I'm just making that up as a potential thing. Yeah, but and I want to run this and I want to run that. Yeah, but all that favors Kenny or all that favors Steve or all that favors CJ. Then you're like, exactly. Because then I'm going to find the guy that best runs what I do because I'm now building it around everybody else. Since those 3 quarterbacks are very similar in skill set, who runs my offense the best? So it's a little bit different than other years, Trev. And I think that the fact that Marcus Freeman said, look, they're all kind of similar, gives Mike Denbrock a unique opportunity where he can actually now focus instead of what the quarterbacks do best, because they're all going to be different. Like they all have a similar skill set, but they're not all going to read every single concept the same way. They're not all going to be equally as effective at quick game or RPOs or play action or rollouts or whatever. So you run what you like best, see if anybody separates that way. that is something that could help them make this decision, which could like lean into this concept, this stuff over here that fits everybody else better, fits the 10 better. And then now you have to see which quarterback is going to be able to run that most effectively. If you think that you like all three, which I think they do, that could be something that it becomes a bit of a separator for Notre Dame in this decision-making process, Trev, which is not normally how it goes.
I think for me, it also kind of nullifies the idea. I think that there's this idea that while Notre Dame is going in a quarterback battle, the offense is just kind of waiting in the wings to see who that quarterback is going to be for them to start going through changes offensively that we want to see. But with all of them having similar skill sets, you can continue to keep building on the momentum you had from this past season. Then when a starter is named, they're just taking the share of the reps. But all quarterbacks on this roster have the ability to throw the slot fade. We've seen it. All quarterbacks to varying degrees have the ability to read defenses. Now it's just going to depend on, okay, when the starter is named, you can now really start taking off as an offense. But I think that there has been this idea, not just this year at Notre Dame, but with other schools, sometimes there's truth to it, that during a quarterback competition, everybody just kind of has to sit back and wait for when a starter is named, and then the offense can take off. But with three guys, all with very similar skill sets, I don't think that that's the case. And that puts Mike Denbrock, to your point, Bryan, in a very unique position to, you can continue to build on this offense as a whole schematically. And then when a starter gets named, a starter gets named.
Mm-hmm. So, Trev, speaking of a starter being named, this kind of leads into the next topic is, well, first of all, kind of thinking back on yesterday, when you think about just the overall quarterback room, the overall quarterback competition, what was kind of your takeaway from watching what we saw yesterday in relation to the quarterback competition? And I'll tell you what my reaction was. My reaction was that I was, and this is why I wrote the article I wrote today, Trev, is, you know what? I have a guy that I think is best. I have a guy that I think is second best, but not too far behind the best guy. And there's another guy that's a veteran who I probably think is third. At the end of the day, as I'm watching this team play, these guys throw yesterday, I'm watching Blake Hebert throw yesterday, I just kind of had this takeaway like, you know what, man? Quarterback room's in really good position, really good state. It's a really healthy state, to the point where I may think CJ should be the starter, or I may think Kenny should be the starter. At the end of the day, if one of those two guys beats out the other one, they're going to be okay. At the end of the day, if those guys turn the ball over way too much and don't know the offense well enough or don't read defenses well enough, and Steve's the best guy at that, you're like, dude, if that's your worst option, boy, you're kind of all right. I mean, Trev, we watched Notre Dame go, 9-4 a couple years ago, actually 8-2 with Drew Pine as a starter. Tyler went Tyler went 1-2, right, that year. We watched Notre Dame go 8-2, including multiple wins over ranked teams with Drew Pine at quarterback. Drew Pine that year versus Steve Angeli in 2025. I'm taking, and I love Drew Pine as a young man. Great family. This isn't meant to be an insult to Drew, but Steve Angeli is bigger, more athletic, has a way better arm than what Drew did, and Notre Dame went 8-2. Like, if that's your worst option, like, you know what? I think they're going to be okay. Maybe they won't have the ceiling as a team, but when I watch those other two kids throw, and then you start thinking about Blake Hebert, and then that led me to start thinking about Noah Grubbs, you start saying, like, man, I kind of feel like, I was reading the Bible the other day, and I'm thinking about relating it to that. It's like, what did the Israelites feel when they finally kind of came out of the wilderness and went into the promised land? It's like, that's kind of how I feel from a football standpoint. Like, we've been in this quarterback wilderness for so long, and I feel like Riley kind of took us to the edge of it, and now it's like you see it in front of you. The promised land is in front of you, and you got to have great quarterback play to get there. And for a long time, Notre Dame didn't have that, so we were wandering in the wilderness, man. When's that quarterback guy going to step up? And I look at it now, and I'm like, dude, they're going to be all right, because unlike past years, it's not, if this guy doesn't step up, they're in trouble. If Tyler Buckner's not what we hope he is, they're in trouble. If Phil Jurkovec is not who we hope he is, then they're going to be stuck with Ian Book, with all due respect. If this guy's not as good as we hope he is, then this team isn't. If Brandon Wimbush isn't as good as we hope he is, they're going to be in trouble. Now it's kind of like, yeah, I got my favorite, but God, they're going to be okay, guys. Now and in the future. Because when I watched Kenny and CJ throw the ball around yesterday, and then I watched Blake Hebert throw the ball around yesterday. I'm thinking back and I'm watching Steve Angeli throw the ball around. I'm thinking, just 3 seasons ago, I was watching Drew Pine, Tyler Buckner, and Steve Angeli throw the ball around with Dylan Devizin, who's now a running back. Two of the 4 guys in that quarterback room are now playing skill positions for Notre Dame that aren't quarterback. Think about that. You realize, dude, I think they're in a great place. And so it's like my fear, my concern about how's this team going to be was eased. And again, that's a bit of a hot take, and it wasn't just because of yesterday. It's my evaluation of these players over the last couple years. And then yesterday was just kind of that reminder of, you know what, B? They're going to be okay, man. This position is going to be all right because these kids can flat out spin it. And you're about to enter a very different period of covering Notre Dame football because of this group right here. That was my big takeaway from watching practice yesterday. The culmination of getting to yesterday's practice.
For me, the biggest takeaway, one, overarching, I didn't go into the spring practice and learn anything new about this quarterback room. It just kind of confirmed a lot of the things that we had been talking about. They got some cats in that room that can spin it different. I finally had the opportunity to see it in person. It was awesome. For me, the biggest thing is we've seen position groups, different position rooms at Notre Dame, elevate their floor, what their standard is, what the expectation is for that room. And we've seen it now really over the course of a decade, and it hits different rooms at different times. With Marcus Freeman, I think we've seen a little bit more of an expedited journey for some of these rooms in comparison to previous regimes. I think the quarterback room is now just caught up with where some of the other ones have. I mean, the offensive line for the longest time, it's always just been one of those, well, I don't really know who's going to replace them, but whoever it's going to be, I think they're going to be okay. That's been that way for the offensive line, tight end room for a while. Running backs, it really started with Josh Adams, and then it was just kind of, you know what, I know they're losing Josh Adams, but, they got Dexter Williams. I know they're losing Dexter Williams, got Tony Jones. No, they're losing Tony Jones. They got Kyron Williams. And it starts to fall in line. More recently, it's been things at corner. Yeah, they're losing Cam Harp, and, they got BMO and a couple young guys waiting in the wings. Yeah, I know BMO's no longer there, but now, they got Christian Gray and Leonard Moore, and you're starting to see it. Linebacker, it's the same thing. Man, you lose JD and Maris. Yeah, but you still have Kaiser and Drake Bowen's really sharp. Now it's the quarterback room is now caught up with that, which is really promising. There's some other rooms that need to get there. Now, wide receiver room has been another hot topic of discussion. I think that the wide receiver room this year could have the year that Riley Leonard had for the quarterback room last year, this season, which is really exciting. But to me, that's what yesterday's practice showed me, is that now the quarterback room is finally at the spot where it doesn't have to be, well, it's this guy or bust. Like you said, like all of the other position groups before it has followed up. Because before it was man, they really need Jalen Smith in this linebacker room, because if not, this linebacking room looks a lot different. And now you look at it, it's like, okay, well, yeah, they got Drake Bowen, and man, they got Kingston. It's really exciting. Well, what happens if Kingston doesn't pan out? Yeah, well, they have Jaden Osbury and Madden Framo and Jalen Sneed and Teddy Rizak and Preston Zinter. And the list goes on and on and on. You say the same thing about the cornerback room now. I think we're going to have a lot of similar conversations around the safety room now that Xavier Watts has departed. So that's really exciting for me. And that is probably my biggest takeaway from yesterday of, you look at this quarterback room, and whether it is one of CJ or Kenny or Steve or Blake, now or down the road, it's comforting, because now you can truly have a competition of who's the best going to be, not we need this singular player to ball out for Notre Dame to be successful this year. That's really exciting. It's in an awesome spot to be in.
So you're saying is not only does it not matter as much for that singular quarterback because of the talent in the room overall, but am I reading you correctly in that you're also saying that because of the talent around that quarterback, that starter doesn't even necessarily have to maximize every ounce of potential he has to carry the football team the way that they may have needed in the past? Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. Yeah,
That's a good place to be, man. So
sure
then we
is.
have to ask the question, does it matter who starts at quarterback? Like, and I have an answer for this one, but the premise, what I'm saying is, if we feel the way that we feel, then does it matter who? And when we mean who matter, we're talking about Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, and CJ Carr. That's what we're referring to. Does it matter who starts at quarterback? I'll let you answer that question first, Trev, before I answer mine.
To me, the answer is still yes. For the same reason why it still matters in the other position rooms, it does still matter to some degree who starts. The quarterback is a different beast than linebacker for obvious reasons. They can rotate a little bit more. But at the quarterback position specifically, you start talking about the ceiling of the team. And I am under the impression that there are certain guys in that room, that can take this team a little bit farther than what others can. I was really impressed with Blake Hebert. Like I said after yesterday, I think that dude has an absolute hose attached to his arm. I don't think we're going to see that on the field in 2025 in a meaningful game, in a meaningful situation. Now, I do think in comparison to previous years, if there is some unforeseen situation where Blake Hebert has to go in and play in a meaningful, I don't think that all hope is lost because of some of the supporting cast around him. But I say all of that to say, I do think it does still matter who starts, because we're talking about the ceiling and how far this team can go. And I do think that that ceiling is higher, but it's not, in comparison to years past, it's not a Notre Dame is either going to be bowl eligible with this team or they're not going to be with this guy starting at quarterback. Now it's just, are they going to make it back to the national championship? Are they going to make it back to the semifinals? Are they going to host a home playoff game? That is now the varying degrees of what we're talking about, in my opinion. So, yes, I do think it still matters who starts at quarterback, but the conversation isn't, boy, if Tyler Buchner doesn't work out, I don't even know if they're going to make the playoffs. I think it's just a question of how far do they make it in the playoffs, depending on who starts. That's my read on the situation.
So what you're saying is the floor doesn't matter quite as much, but the ceiling does. And
Correct.
That's exactly where I'm at. And here's what I mean by it matters, but not in the same way it has in the past. And this kind of goes back to my overall feeling of the quarterback room that yesterday reminded me of. And I'll tell you exactly why yesterday reminded me of it. I'm just going to be as open and honest as possible here. It matters from the standpoint of, I think Notre Dame is a playoff team no matter who starts a quarterback. And our guy Andrew Gilmore had a comment that I think is a very fair comment. He said, I think it matters because if he gets it wrong, they could be eliminated by the end of September. That's actually not my fear. That's true for all three of the quarterbacks. For no matter what you feel the pros and cons are, that could be true for all three of the quarterbacks. But I think losing 2 games in September is a much bigger issue for the entire team. It means you have issues on the offensive line. It means you have issues with your defense. I think all these quarterbacks are capable of winning minimum 10 games, but I think all three of these quarterbacks, I think it's 4, I meant 3, because Blake Hebert's a true freshman. I'm not as worried about that. I think all these guys with the team around them. This is the thing that this is kind of where my response to Andrew's coming from is, with the team around them, they don't need the quarterback to go out and play like a Heisman winner to go 3-1 or 4-0 in September. If they can't go 2-1 against Miami, Arkansas, Purdue, or 2-2 against, what is it, Miami, A&M at home, Purdue at home, and Arkansas, then you got much bigger problems in your quarterback position. That's where I'm at. So that's not a concern for me. If you go 2-2 with any of these quarterbacks, you might have gone 2-2 with all of them, because it means your defense isn't as good, your offensive line is struggling, you're not where you think you need to be at the skill positions. Because here's the deal. If the quarterback play against Arkansas is mediocre, Notre Dame still has a significantly better roster than Arkansas does. And their quarterback's not an elite player either. If Notre Dame can't go 1-1 against Miami and A&M, who are both good football teams but not elite football teams, that their roster is still better, if not significantly better, than both of those teams. So if you lose, I have a hard time believing any of these quarterbacks is going to be able to play bad enough to where he's the reason that they lose. I think it means there's bigger issues afoot. I think you hit the nail on the head, Trevor, of why it does matter who starts. Because it's not so much about getting to the show. It's about what do you do when you get there? And we always talk about this. Because what's interesting is I've seen Andrew make a couple comments in the chat, and it's he's making really like I get where he's coming from with the lights. Like he talks about like he thinks now's the time for CJ Carr. Well, here's the thing. I could argue that starting CJ or Kenny actually gives you the greatest chance to potentially lose 2 games in September. So you're kind of making 2 different arguments. Because I think the thing about Steve Angeli is with Steve, you know, the argument is that he'll make the least amount of mistakes and those type of things, right? It comes down to it's the young guys you're worried about going out there and making those mistakes, making that bad turnover that could hurt the team. Now, I don't necessarily accept that premise for a host of reasons that I don't really want to get into today because it's not the point. The point is, if your thought is, because Andrew, you made another comment that I think makes a lot of sense, and it's this. He made this comment before that. He says, Freeman just got a big extension. I'll bring it up. He said, Freeman just got a big extension. He is able to take a longer-term approach to the program. I hope that he narrows it down to 2 post-spring and makes a decision after week 1 of fall camp or sooner. Here's my response to that, Andrew. What if the best answer long-term also puts you at the greatest risk of maybe going 2-2 in September? Or losing 2 games in September? Because I actually think that he's right in that Freeman can take a longer view and needs to take a longer view of this. Not in that he shouldn't care as much about who gives me the best chance to beat Miami, but who gives me the best chance to beat Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Clemson, those type of teams. And that guy on August 31st may not be your best chance to beat Miami. Now, he may be. It may be both. So I actually want Coach Freeman to take a bit of a longer view of that. So, and Justin Kane just mentioned, you know, Riley Leonard dropped a game to Northern Illinois. So certainly possible to lose to Miami and A&M. Exactly my point. Because I'll take losing one of those early games if it means the guy that gives us our highest ceiling gets the opportunity to learn from some of those early struggles to then be prepared to thrive down the road. But again, Riley Leonard didn't drop a game to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame dropped a game to Northern Illinois. Riley Leonard did not give up an 80-plus yard touchdown reception to a running back. Riley Leonard didn't fail to cover a wheel route to the running back. Riley Leonard didn't drop a pass that might have gone for 6. Riley Leonard had plenty of issues in that game. Riley Leonard is not why the offensive line got their butts whooped for 60 minutes by Northern Illinois and why the defense couldn't stop Northern Illinois from running the football, which is kind of my whole point. You lost that game because your team was not ready to play that day. If the Notre Dame team, if Riley Leonard would have played the exact same game against Northern Illinois that he played, but everybody around him played like they did against Texas A&M, Notre Dame's 12-0 in the regular season. Or at least they're 2-0 to start the season. That's kind of my point. But once you got to the playoffs, you needed 13 at quarterback if you were going to beat Georgia, if you were going to beat Penn State, and if you're going to have a chance to beat Ohio State. And that's why I think this conversation matters. Not that and Andrew, I'm not pushing back on you. I'm just saying these are some of the things that you're saying are sparking very interesting things that go into the decision-making that the staff has to make. And that's what I think is really fascinating about this decision. And a lot of people don't look at it that way from a coaching standpoint. So to me, Trev, it matters. And it matters from the standpoint of, I believe there's 2 quarterbacks on this roster this year that if you can get them playing to their best potential for this season, meaning not they can play to their maximum career potential this year, but that they can be the best version of themselves at where they are in their development, give this team the best chance to play for a championship. Because I think at the end of the day, even though I think Notre Dame's got a great roster, you're still going to need your quarterback to make some big-time plays and some big-time moments. You saw that with Ohio State against Notre Dame. For all the butt-whooping Ohio State did on Notre Dame early, if Will Howard does not complete that 3rd and 11 pass to Jeremiah Smith and Notre Dame gets the ball back with over 2 minutes left and a chance to tie the way they had been shredding Ohio State's defense in the second half, we might be going to overtime. So you still need your quarterback to be that money player. And I think that matters. And so here's where I'm at. It doesn't matter that the one guy that I think above all others is the best quarterback wins the job. And I mean, CJ Carr, I've said that before. I think CJ Carr, his ceiling is higher than others. I just think the way he fits, all the things he can do, I think he's a special quarterback. I graded him out as a 5-star, top 25 player. But also graded Kenny Minchey out as a top 100 player. If Kenny Minchey goes out there and beats out CJ Carr, let's roll, son. I mean, that's where I'm at. If CJ Carr beats out Kenny Minchey, let's roll, son. That's where I'm at. Let's go. Let's do this thing. I still think it matters that one of those 2 guys wins the starting job. Because I think at the end of the day, Trev, you nailed it. The floor is as high as it's been for this Notre Dame football team because of everything else around this team. And none of these guys are a liability, in my opinion, to the point where they can't get this team to the playoff. Steve Angeli can lead this Notre Dame football team to the college football playoffs. I don't have a doubt in my mind that he can do that with the talent around him. So can Kenny. So can CJ. My decision comes down to who gives this team. I mean, people say I've been accused of being a Steve Angeli hater. I literally said Rutgers wins at least 2 more games with Steve Angeli at quarterback than they won last year. That tells me I have a high. But what's the standard? It's to win it all. And I think those 2 kids, whoever performs the best of that duo, of that 1-2 punch, that's who gives Notre Dame the best chance to beat Georgia again, to beat Ohio State, to beat Oregon, to beat Texas, to beat Alabama, to beat a Penn State, to beat a Clemson. I think it's one of those 2 guys. And yesterday kind of got me excited about it, but it also kind of reminded me where it's like, I love that kid. He's a great kid, but these 2 are just different. And the best teams have guys throughout their roster that you just look at and say, that may be a great kid, but that cat's different. That cat's different. And that's why I still do think it matters that the higher ceiling player in this instance gets the job. And a lot of it, Trevor, has to do with what you said is it's the team around him. You don't need the quarterback in September to necessarily carry the team the way you did in the past. You had to start. I know this for a fact. There were Notre Dame coaches that thought Ian Book should have been the starting quarterback in 2018 before the season. But Chip Long knew, and Brian Kelly knew, we can't beat Michigan without Brandon Wimbush as our starter. Just the matchup was such that was a really good Michigan team. They thought the chances would be less because they thought that Michigan's pass rush would present some problems for a guy that they needed Brandon's running ability, and they did. And there's that 3rd and 11 play where I think it was Josh Uche. Uche is coming off the edge. He's got Brandon dead to rights. Brandon spins out of it, runs and scrambles for a first down. Notre Dame goes down to get points. I mean, you needed that ability in that game. But after that, you could cut. But that's because Brandon needed to carry the team to victory. I think the makeup of this roster and who they play, because Miami's not 2018 Michigan. Texas A&M, I don't think, is 2018 Michigan. I don't think they need that guy to necessarily put the team on his shoulders and say, we need you to go win the day. And if that's the case, then I've got some bigger questions about some other positions on this team than I do quarterback. So that's my stance of why it still matters, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are in the same boat. Notre Dame is at a spot now as a program where they don't need, in the regular season, their quarterback to play like a Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback to go 11-1 or 12-0 or even 10-2. You can just go back through and look at Riley Leonard's game by game stats last year. They beat Navy 51-14. He passed for 178 yards. They beat Purdue 66-7. He passed for 112 yards. They beat Army 49-14, passed for 148 yards. And yes, I know that he added a different dynamic with his legs, but even so, in that game against Army, he rushed for 30 yards, no touchdowns. In that game against Navy, he had 83 yards on the ground, but he's not doing
he
things
also
that
only played like one series in the third quarter in that game too. But your point stands. Yeah.
that even more fuels the point. It's not like he only played a half because he was just this unstoppable force. Just the team around him is that good.
Right.
I mean,
He did throw some dimes in both of those games, but he's not the reason Jeremiah Love ran it for 60 some yards. He's not the reason in both games. The team was way better. You needed Riley to beat Georgia, not Army, not Navy.
Yep. And all of that reflected in the postseason. Riley Leonard goes for over 200 yards in the air, 30 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown against IU. He's your leading rusher against Georgia, passed for 223 against Penn State, passed for 255 and 2 touchdowns against Ohio State in the national championship. That's where it matters. That's why it matters who starts at the end of the day, because there's 2 quarterbacks on the roster that I firmly believe that can do that. And there's one that I'm not saying that he can't. I just have more reservations about in the postseason.
Yeah. And I don't think he can. I mean, I think your team is going to have to really play at a higher level. And I could be wrong about Steve. And if he starts, I hope that I am wrong about him. But just yesterday kind of confirmed that. Just like it's just like we talked about linebacker. Like, why can we say that at linebacker when we're like, dude, Madden Faremo is just a different cat. There's just a different animal there, man. Or boy, Leonard Moore's he's just a different cat. But then you say that at quarterback, and it's like, oh, but it's like, dude, look, say whatever you want. I know quarterback. I know that position, and I'm watching those 2 kids throw, and I'm just like, and we said it all last year when CJ and Kenny were always on one side, and then Steve and Gino Gaduli, or Steven, when Riley came back, Steve and Riley on one side. You're like, dude, the ball looks a whole lot different going this way than it does coming this way. I had a buddy of mine who was at the Georgia Tech game, and he said the same thing. And his nephew was with him, and he's like, it looks a whole lot different when number 8 throws it than because CJ wasn't fully healthy then. He goes, it looks different when number 8 throws the football. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I do think it still matters. So fun quarterback conversation, Trev. We're going to get to the mailbag next, folks. But before we do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or whatever podcast platform you like. Just takes you a couple minutes, and it helps us tremendously when you do that. So we're going to mailbag next. But before we do, folks, again, hit that like button. We appreciate you. Looking forward to the next part of this discussion on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.